All right, we are live.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for a town hall on the implementation of the police accountability boards. My name is Yanetta Emanuel, Interim Public Policy Director at the ACLU of Maryland. So glad that everyone's here. We can talk about the implementation of the police reform that passed last session and the work that has gone to making sure that the police accountability boards that were enabled through HB 670 are implemented appropriately and to the needs of the community. Before we get to our primary focus tonight, I want to highlight two legislative priorities for the coalition this session. One is Quam's Law, which is essentially a bill that would prohibit ensure that police officers in plainclothes uniform are also required to wear body cameras. And then our other big priority this session is the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board bill, which would make sure that we are keeping intact the current structure and powers of the Baltimore Civilian Review Board, while also absorbing the powers and responsibilities of the Police Accountability Board, which folks will get into later this evening. And so now on to tonight's discussion. You will hear from MCJPA member organizations and coalitions from across the state about their local efforts to establish effective community oversight through the implementation of police accountability boards in their specific jurisdictions. In many jurisdictions, this will be the only community oversight of police misconduct that we will have. And we want everyone to understand how the implementation is going, what challenges that we're facing, and the resistance that is showing, the resistance that we're experiencing in different communities and counties. So tonight you'll hear from what's happening in several jurisdictions, including Baltimore City, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Calvert County, Howard County, Baltimore County, as well as Arundel. And so with that, I will turn it over to Davon Love to kick us off.
All right. Good evening, everyone. This is Davon Love. I'm Director of Public Policy for Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. What I want to do just briefly is just give some context for the demands that were made during the last legislative session. Just to give some perspective on why the issue of police accountability boards and community oversight is so important. When we look historically at the work around addressing police brutality, when you look particularly in the mid and late 60s, where there were several civil unrest that emerged as a result of police killings, one of the fundamental policy demands that emerged, whether it was the more traditional civil rights organizations, or whether or not it was some of the more radical Black liberation organizations, one of the consistent demands was around community control. And that was something that actually spanned across different industries, whether it's community control of education, whether it's community control of a variety of different institutions, the anti-poverty programs, but one of which was community control of law enforcement. And so you see during this period of time, the emergence of the demands around community oversight, where the community, an independent entity outside of law enforcement, has the infrastructure and authority to both investigate police misconduct and have disciplinary power over law enforcement, particularly when complaints of police brutality come in from the public, the ability and authority to discipline police officers for that. So that's really the frame. And so what you'll notice that when you look at some of the mainstream conversations about police brutality and police accountability, police reform, you'll see lots of different aspects of the problem addressed. You'll hear things about police training. You'll hear things about body cameras, right? You'll hear a variety of different issues that in their own right are important. But this coalition last session placed community oversight as the pinnacle of what constitutes racial justice as it relates to police accountability, because the analysis that we enter this work with is that the biggest deterrent to brutality against our community is for the community to have the power to levy consequences against those who do harm to our community. And so we talk about the distribution of power into the hands of Black people and people of color and people who are most directly impacted by police brutality. This is why community oversight, both historically and in the context of our work, has been deemed a priority as it relates to police accountability work. So last session, there were, again, a variety of different issues that we focused on. One of the major impediments to community oversight has been the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. So that was something codified 1974 in the state of Maryland. Maryland was the first of many states that eventually developed a law enforcement officer's Bill of Rights. And there are a variety of things that were problematic about it. But one of the reasons that we focus so much on this, both in the past, right? So back 2015, 2016, and last session, was because in order to get community oversight, LEOBR, the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, needed to be repealed. Now, what has happened as a result is that leadership understood in the Democratic Party and legislature recognized that there needed to be something that replaced LEOBR. And so there's a disciplinary structure that was in the Police Accountability Act of 2021, HB 670, that had a variety of different new aspects of the disciplinary process that did increase the potential for community involvement in the process of discipline, but ultimately didn't accomplish the goal of community oversight, which was something that this coalition fought hard for, and was one of the things that we were disappointed was not reflected in the new disciplinary structure that ended up passing last session. But the work of the police accountability boards, which are a requirement of HB 670 for every jurisdiction in the state, will serve as a container by which the community will be able to make complaints, formal complaints about officers who brutalize or engage in misconduct. And so the work moving forward is around how to utilize these police accountability boards that have been carved out as a result of what passed at HB 670, how we use those to the best of our ability to get us as close to community oversight as we can possibly get. So I'll stop there, pass it back to you, Nat, to talk a little bit more about what actually passed last session.
Thank you so much. So last session, as Davon mentioned, we passed the Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021, and which is HB 670, and in it required that each jurisdiction in the state of Maryland implement a police accountability board. So the Police Accountability Board is responsible for, one, holding quarterly meetings with the heads of law enforcement agencies and the county government to improve matters of policing. Most importantly, appoint members to an internal charging committee and trial board, receive complaints of police misconduct filed by members of the public, and on a quarterly basis, review outcomes of disciplinary matters considered by the charging committees, as well as submit a report that identifies the trends in the disciplinary process of police officers. And that each county council or city council, and then in Baltimore City's case, Baltimore City Council, is required for appointing members to the two members to the administrative charging committee and one to the trial board. And the bill also mandates that these boards are provided with a budget in order to carry out their duties. And then so in addition to the Police Accountability Board, I mentioned administrative charging committee. This charging committee is responsible for reviewing internal affairs investigation about these police misconduct complaints, and then deciding whether or not to charge a police, whether or not they find a police officer guilty, and if they do, what is the appropriate punishment. And this administrative charging board is made up of the chair of the Police Accountability Board or their designee, and two civilians appointed by the Police Accountability Board. There's an additional two other members that are appointed by the CEO of that county, which is the county executive, or in Baltimore City's case, the mayor of Baltimore. And then again, the trial board, there's one person that the CEO of the county can appoint, which can be administrative law judge of their choice, or and then there's one police officer and then another member appointed by the Police Accountability Board. So that's just a recap of the Police Accountability Board structure and the Administrative Charging Committee and how they interplay. Before turning it over to the panels from tonight, I think I just will highlight that the most critical part about these Police Accountability Boards are the membership, but they are limited in their powers. They will mostly be able to review, but they will be able to appoint members to this internal charging committee that essentially will have a big role in reviewing investigations from internal affairs, but also deciding appropriate discipline for police officers. So it's really critical that the membership of these boards really do truly reflect the community, especially those that have been impacted, because ultimately they are going to have a much larger role in participating in the process of holding police discipline, but it's still not anywhere close to where we really do need, which is an external community oversight body that has the power to do more than just review, but also investigate, issue subpoenas, and ultimately decide discipline that is final. So I will stop there and I will kick it back to Baltimore City to kick us off first tonight with an update about what's happening there with the implementation of the Police Accountability Board. So I will turn it over to Davon Love and Tiara Hawks, who's also the chair of the Baltimore Civilian Review Board, and really happy to have you here today.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly talk about the history of the CRB, and then I'm going to kick it to Tiara to talk about the work that the CRB's been doing. And then I will pick up after that and talk about the bill that's before the Maryland General Assembly. So one of the things that's important for people watching this to be clear about is that one of the unique things about Baltimore City is that our police department is technically a state agency. That's important because in 1999, when the Civilian Review Board was created, it was created via a state statute. Because again, Baltimore didn't have the power to go to its council and to create such an oversight entity. In the initial proposal, it included many of the things that I talked about at the top, which was investigatory power and disciplinary power. It was significantly weakened in terms of the bill that actually ended up passing, but what it did retain was subpoena power and investigatory power. And the CRB also has the authority in its investigation to make a recommendation to the commission. Commission doesn't have to honor it, but it at least provides, again, some of those investigatory and subpoena power that is important and that makes Baltimore unique. Last thing I'll say before I pass it over to Tiara is that when the leadership passed HB 670 and required the establishment of the police accountability boards, I think an honest oversight is that they didn't consider those jurisdictions that already had an existing oversight entity, right? And so in this case, Prince George's County and Baltimore City are two entities that had an existing oversight structure. And so as I'll talk about later on, the bill that we will put forward is to attempt to reconcile the two. But I'll pass it to Tiara Hawks, who's the chair of the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board, to talk about the work that they've done and some of the advocacy that we've done on the bill.
Thank you, Davon. Good evening, everyone. As has already been stated, the CRB is the only entity in Baltimore City that can investigate complaints of police misconduct. We're a neutral, safe place where citizens can file complaints. And in return, we issue discipline recommendations based on our knowledge and our training, based on what we received, the information we received from the investigation, and our common sense. The board is made up of, when we have a full board, 9 police districts. And so they each represent, they each have a member from each district. And then we have non-voting members from the ACLU, the FOP, and NAACP, and we also have a representative from BPD. Our current board is made up of a diverse group of people from all walks of life and who have had different experiences with police. And we also have lawyers, psychologists, nurses, school counselors, all kinds of people on the board. There are 5 categories of complaints that we hear, and they are abusive language, excessive force, false arrest, and false imprisonment. In 2021, during the pandemic, we got 117 complaints. We conducted 60 investigations, and we issued 49 recommendations. I think that in a time where we thought that policing and police misconduct would go down, we are seeing that there's still a lot of issues that are going on between citizens of Baltimore City and police. So essentially, I think that the CRB is in the policing business. Of course, we've had challenges and we've been ridiculed a lot because our statutory authority as it currently is does not give us a lot of power, a lot of leeway. We do have limited power. Because of the limitations of the 5 allegations, and we also lack resources. So we don't have a fancy database system. Those numbers that I gave you are numbers that we collect ourselves and keep. We don't have like outreach or anything like that. We just have a basic social media page. We don't have someone working for us who can help us do those things. And we're a board of volunteers. So it's not like we have invested interest in the board that's monetary. We need more investigators. We need more things. And if we get those things, I think we would be more aligned with what the Maryland General Assembly wanted us to be when we were first created. We know that the CRB will be able to do the work of the PAB, mainly because we've already been doing the work. We already have a structure that's in place. We already know how things work. We have a relationship with BPD. Whether it's great or not, that's still to be determined. But we have a relationship. We're working towards doing things. So we're striving to have more police transparency and accountability. We are a part of the consent decree, so we can't be ignored. They can't just sweep us under the rug. I think there's a lot to be said about that. We wouldn't have been created if there wasn't a need for us. It does appear to me that the city wants to create its own entity. It wants to be, I don't know what it wants to be, but they don't intend to keep the CRB in its current structure. And I think that's a flawed perception when we're thinking about civilian oversight and what we want it to look like. It seems like we want something that looks more like the CRB, and they're essentially moving backwards. So with that, the CRB is going to continue to do the work until someone tells us that to stop. And I don't know who that has to be, but it won't be the city at this point. So I'll kick it back to Davon.
So the legislation that we're passing, because again, Baltimore City's police department is technically a state agency. There is work that is happening parallel to what we're doing to essentially make that change. But the earliest that that'll happen is 2025 in terms of when that would actually, be in place. So in the meantime, we put forward a bill that would essentially have the Baltimore City Civilian Review Board absorb the powers and responsibilities of the Police Accountability Board, building on what the CRB already is able to do, and also providing it the independence and resources that it needs to be able to effectively carry out its duties. So that's essentially, and it's SB 441 and House Bill 991. It is the Senate sponsors, Senator Joe Carter. The House sponsor is Delegate Stephanie Smith. And so our hope is that this bill would be an example of what it could mean to push closer into the direction of authentic and true community oversight, where the community has the power that it deserves. As Tiara mentioned, and I'll end on this, as Tiara mentioned, unfortunately, the Scott administration is opposed to this piece of legislation. And I wanted to make it a point to raise that, because I think as other jurisdictions talk about the challenges that they are having in the work that they're doing on their police accountability boards, we'll see a similar trend, right? Where, administrations that may have talked about the importance of civilian oversight and police accountability, but when it comes to actually giving the community the power that it needs, that we'll see kind of a different tune. Right. And so, this bill that we're putting forward, it's more efficient for the city because they don't have to build an entirely new thing. It's a waste of resources to have both a police accountability board and a CRB operating independently. And unfortunately, what the city has said on the record that they plan on doing is building a PAB and then eventually repealing the CRB statute of 99. And as Tiara mentioned, if this city were to do that, Baltimore City would lose the limited investigatory powers that it does have, again, moving us in the opposite direction of community oversight. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Davon and Tiara. So next we're going to talk about Prince George's County, and I'm going to bring up Don Dalton and Beverly John. And I just want to lift up that I think we're seeing similar efforts in Prince George's County, which these two, will be able to go more into, but I don't think it's not ironic. And the Prince George's County Civilian Oversight Panel was established in 1990, which was in a response to communities advocating for civilian oversight. And similarly, Prince George's County is the only other entity that has investigatory and subpoena powers and has historically been underfunded. And just the mechanisms of how you even get on the board are very unclear to members of the community. So I'll just want to lift that up, and I'll turn it over to Beverly and Don.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to share our endeavors with Prince George's County. So in Prince George's County, after last year's legislation, we were hopeful and looking forward to having a police accountability board that would be diverse and reflect the community, be fair. We learned that that was clearly not the case. On January 6, 2022, we were advised that the PG County Executive had posted a request for applicants interested in interviewing to become members of the PAB with a turnaround time of 1 week. Advocates reacted to this disturbing news by holding a car rally at the county executive building in conjunction with expressing our strong opposition via an interview with News 4 and Tracy Wilkins. We were then successful in having the application deadline pushed back by 2 weeks. However, we were advised during an MCJPA meeting by 2 community members that applied to be on the PAB that they had concerns regarding the interview process because the questions that they were asked were steering for elimination, and the fact that the interviews were all held by one person, not by a panel. They also flagged the fact that the application cutoff was on a Friday, yet they were interviewed on Monday, and they were told that they were not even close to the beginning of the line. So many people had been interviewed before them. Beverly then reached out to her council member to arrange a meeting between some community members and council members, and she can share more about how that meeting went and what we learned once we met with the county council. Beverly, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, so I reached out to my council member with really like a question of what the heck is going on, because did y'all know anything about this? And apparently her particular office did not know anything about it, but we did find out that we have been the victims of a sneak game where the county exec has appointed a work group in November of 2021 to work on implementation of the PAB board. And this work group is about a little over 20 people, and I would say 80 to 85% of them are law enforcement. So they've effectively preempted the ability of like any single council member to lift up legislation that would probably been more collaborative with the community. What's happening is we are now waiting with bated breath for the work group to submit their draft legislation to the council. And then at that point in time is when we were told, there would be some public commenting period and that type of thing, which we all know would be ineffective for us at this point. So we were really trying to, at this point, I think, get some community engagement, a lot of community engagement in terms of, voicing our strong opposition to whatever is going to go on, because we know that that's really probably the only way that, this won't be, railroaded and pushed down our throats as being the end all be all based on what they decide. So, we're doing some next steps, looking to actually anybody who's a member of the Prince George's County team. I'll be reaching out to you all to hopefully hold a quick huddle meeting next week. I'll give some dates, but we need to do a quick huddle so that we can get some actions done. To include, we have a draft op-ed that we have worked on prior to finding out about these egregious questions and the interview process. So we want to include that, our strong opposition to that, into the op-ed, and then actually get a couple more people or organizations to sign on to it. We also have a letter drafted to County Exec Angela also Brooks to let her know how we're feeling for whatever that's worth. She usually is very silent. We don't get any response, but we're going to give some comments anyway. And pretty much, yeah, we're really just going to look to maybe some other actions, like maybe another rally, phone banking. And again, the biggest thing is we have to get together and schedule meetings with the other county council members so that they understand, where we're coming from with our recommendations and our concerns about this whole process. And we hope, that we will be able to get this done before the draft legislation is released to them. So there's a sense of urgency to what we're doing. So again, I'll be reaching out to anybody that's in Prince George's County, and I'll put my email address in the chat for anyone who I may not have reached out to, that if you're interested in helping with the Prince George's County work, please reach out and let me know, and we'll get you in on the meetings and get into action. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. And I think this perfectly highlights the efforts that are happening in Baltimore City to dissolve the Civilian Review Board there. And then also we heard on a call on a county council meeting a few weeks ago in Prince George's County, they also had the plans, the work group was discussing plans to dissolve the Prince George's County Civilian Oversight Panel, which again has those investigatory and subpoena powers, and conforming it to a Police Accountability Board that we still don't know what that structure or makeup looks like, because we have not seen or heard any proposal from the county yet. So we want to lift that up. And before we move on, Nikki, did you have anything you wanted to add? Thank you. And so next we'll move on to hear from Howard County. So Jim, I'm turning it over to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Jim. We're going to Joanna first, and then we're going to you. I'm sorry.
Great. Thanks, Yannette. My name is Joanna Silver. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the co-chair of the policy committee for the Silver Spring Justice Coalition. So the Silver Spring Justice Coalition started agitating and organizing around the implementation of the police accountability boards in Montgomery County in the fall. And we started by sending a letter basically demanding community input into the drafting of the bill. We wanted to have a voice in the process before a bill was introduced. We were ignored. And then we learned in mid-December that a bill was about to be introduced without any public input at all. So we sent a letter that was signed by 19 different organizations, again, demanding public input. And we also issued a press release attaching that letter. We did not get that public input before the bill was introduced, but the public pressure that we had mounted did result in a promise to have a public hearing on the bill scheduled at night so that more people could attend, and to have, if necessary, more than one public hearing on the bill that had been introduced. The pressure we mounted also resulted in some helpful public statements by council members during the bill's introduction, making a lot of statements and promises about the bill being just a starting point, and promises that it would be significantly amended. And before talking about what this bill looked like, what we were looking for, which Yannette wanted us to share with you all to begin with, is things like independent legal counsel for these boards, independent and dedicated staff, compensation for all board members, membership criteria and guidelines that would result in boards that reflected the diversity of our community and particularly included people who are most directly impacted by policing. And then, as Davon discussed, expanded powers for the Police Accountability Board, including investigative powers. So the bill that was introduced in Montgomery County did not have any of that. It was a terrible bill. Similar to what was happening in Prince George's County, we found out that it was created by a private work group with representatives from our county executive's office, our county council staff, and the police. And it was a bare bones bill that included the basic requirements for these boards from HB 670, plus a requirement that the county attorney, who also represents our police and the county government, serve as counsel. It created a police accountability board that only had 5 people on it. And then it created 3 strict membership requirements for both the Administrative Charging Committee and the Police Accountability Board. And it said that to serve on either of these boards, you had to have experience either managing or evaluating the management of a law enforcement agency, evaluating civilian complaints against police officers, or in personnel disciplinary proceedings as a manager, employee representative, mediator, or arbiter. So in response to this pretty awful bill getting introduced, and it was also introduced in mid-December, right before everyone went on the holiday break, we began drafting talking points with our specific demands and recruiting people to testify at the public hearing that was going to be in early January on the bill. And there was a ton of work that was done by a lot of SSJC's member organizations and a lot of individual people and our partners. And we ended up with 2 hearings with a total of 35 witnesses testifying, and every single witness testified in favor of our basic demands. In addition, everyone testified with a demand to strike those restrictive membership requirements. And the Silver Spring Justice Coalition also submitted written testimony, which contained a really detailed list of specific requested amendments that kind of built on and dug into the basic demands that I mentioned. So another thing that we did that I think was really helpful is that before and after the hearing, we began to work closely with our Policing Advisory Commission. And this is a kind of newish body that was created by a law in Montgomery County about 2 years ago. And it's a body that works for the council and is just supposed to advise the council on matters of policing. So we started working with them to make sure that they supported our demands. And this is an example of how sometimes, long-term work can pay off, because we had been working with them to develop our relationships and nurture those relationships ahead of time. And the result was a really strong collaboration between the community groups and the Policing Advisory Commission. And as a result, the PAC ended up submitting recommended amendments that basically tracked ours. We also began lobbying with members of the County Council's Public Safety Committee, which is the small committee that was going to be working on the amendments to the bill. And in those lobbying meetings, we saw that the public hearings really had a significant impact. The council members and the county executive were taking us very seriously and at least saying that they agreed with a lot of what we were asking for. And then the final thing we did was that we pushed to be able to participate in the Public Safety Committee's work sessions on the bill, and to have representatives of the Policing Advisory Commission also participate. So I'm not sure how it works in other counties, but when these subcommittees of our county council meet in work sessions, they are viewable by the public. In the olden days, we could go and just watch them in the chamber. Now you can watch them on Zoom, but the only people who actually were in there and could speak were members of the committee, other council members, council staff, and then on policing bills, it was always representatives of the police department, but nobody from the community could be there. So we succeeded in getting access to these meetings. And so the last 2 work sessions, Ashanti Martinez from CASA and I, along with 2 members of the Policing Advisory Commission, have been present. And so we've been able to actively participate in the discussion and really engage in a pretty robust back and forth about the amendments. So where we are now, those terrible membership requirements have been struck, and the committee is on the verge of adopting some alternate language that we recommended that really gives kind of a broad aspirational description of the types of backgrounds and life experiences that members should have. Everybody on both boards are going to be compensated, and they still have to decide the details, but it sounds like these are going to be real salaries that are comparable to those of other paid boards that we have in the county. So salaries like in the high teens and low 20s, so 16,000, low, 22,000, something like that. They've also agreed that there will be independent legal counsel. And again, they have to take a final vote on how that will be structured, but it sounds like they're leaning towards requiring our county attorney to retain outside counsel for the boards. They also increased the size of the Police Accountability Board to 9, and they added a requirement that we had asked for, that both boards have to meet at least once a month. Because if you actually look closely at HB 670, it at first included a requirement that the ACC meet once a month, and then it actually struck that and basically said they can meet once a month or as needed. So now the ACC and the PAB have to meet at least once a month. And this is part of kind of our move to try to make the PAB a real working board that does a lot of work. We spent a lot of time in the work sessions discussing our request that no former law enforcement officer can serve on either board. And we also spent time discussing our request that nobody can be excluded from membership based on criminal history or immigration status. Those are 2 that I don't think are going to move forward. We haven't given up entirely, but it sounds like we won't be successful there. And then they also rejected our request that these boards have to consider misconduct investigations that begin internally and not just those that come from a civilian complaint. And I think when we were kind of talking about what we didn't like about HB 670, we didn't realize that one of the bad things about it is that it does only apply expressly to civilian rooted complaints. So even if an officer violently injured or killed a member of the public, if a civilian didn't file a complaint, then the ACC and would not review that case. And that seems to make no sense to us at all. For now, they've rejected that, but we haven't given up. We're going to keep pushing on that front. So where we need to go now, we have a couple of more work sessions coming up, and we're going to be putting out an action alert in the next several days that we'll share out with all of you guys that are going to address some of the things that I'm about to mention. But first of all, we want to make sure that we'll also have a presence at the next work sessions, because they are going to be work sessions with our full council. And we want to make sure that they'll invite us back, because I think that was important. We want to make sure that there's language in the bill that ensures full-time independent staffing for both boards, the PAB and the ACC. We need to confirm that there's going to be an amendment that we were promised that would require our county executive to publish the names and qualifications of nominees to the board, like on the website, so the public can see that and look at it and comment before the council does its confirmation. And then the big lift is that we need to find someone who's willing to introduce amendments related to expanding the powers of the board, because we put in really detailed requested amendments to expand the power of the board. And none of our council members, nobody has said like, no, we're definitely not doing that, but nobody has agreed to introduce an amendment on that yet. And one of those powers that I just want to bring to everyone's attention before I wrap up, that really applies to the ACC that we think is critical, involves when a law enforcement agency has to get the results of their investigation to the administrative charging committee. And that's because HB 670 requires the entire process from filing of a complaint to the ACC issuing its decision to finish in 1 year and 1 day, but it has no internal guidelines. So the law enforcement agency can wait until like month 11 to give their information to the ACC. And that also makes no sense. So we're asking that the bill require monthly status reports to the ACC for all new and pending complaints, and then a completed investigation by like a time certain. And we suggested somewhere between 6 and 8 months. And then we really do want to focus on expanding the powers of the Police Accountability Board. We've asked for them to be able to request information from the law enforcement agencies, do their own investigation, issue subpoenas. And then we also want there to be a collective bargaining preemption amendment. So HB 670 contains that. And so we want to make sure that all of the ways in which our bill is broader than HB 670, that there's no ability to bargain any of that away too. And then I'll close, and I don't know if anyone else will talk about this, by saying that throughout this process, we keep hearing that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission is going to be issuing regulations soon on this bill, and that some of those regulations are really going to limit what the counties can do. It might even prohibit some of the amendments that we're asking for. So we are also concerned about that and waiting to see what will happen with that. So that is it in Montgomery County.
Thank you so much for that update. And thank you for all your hard work there. Turning it over now to Jim from Howard County. I think it's Jim and Ted. And Jim, you're still muted. There you go.
Can you hear me? Excellent. Lorena, are you going to let me share my screen?
You should be able to. If not, let me know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. So, hi, I'm Jim Gormley, and I'm going to talk about our efforts in Howard County on behalf of the Police Accountability Task Force of Howard County. I'm on the steering committee of that task force, as is Ted Stewart and others. We're a small group. We've been engaged with respect to legislation to implement the Police Accountability Board in our county after a flawed bill was introduced by the county executive in November of 2021. Sounds very familiar, without any consultation or pre-work with the community. Working internally, taking advice from law enforcement, from the police department, and then issuing a very flawed bill. Who are we? Well, we're a small group of long-term Howard County residents. We joined together after the murder of George Floyd, organized around trying to address issues and concerns of racial inequality and disparities in policing at the local level. We're a small group, but we've been able to combine with a large number of coalition partners in the county. Active groups also very interested in police accountability and other progressive reforms in the county. You know there, ACLU Maryland is listed as one of our coalition partners. And let me take the opportunity to say thank you so much to Yannette, Sergio, Sebastian, and David Roca in the Law Department for all your support over the last few months as we've worked to try and adjust the flawed bill from the county executive. Our coalition partners allowed us to be, I think, a fairly powerful voice, or a very powerful voice for the community on matters of police accountability in the county, and we will continue to work with all of our coalition partners to continue that in the future. So, the bill introduced by Dr. Hall had significant flaws. As I mentioned, it was a product of a total lack of engagement with either us or anyone, to our knowledge, in the community. And also a very narrow perspective, very narrow interpretation of the scope and responsibilities of the Police Accountability Board coming out of the state legislation. I think reflecting again the law enforcement perspective. One official noted at a county council work session that the PAB was simply a receptacle for the receipt and forwarding of complaints, no more, no less, with no forward or public-facing role, which of course we disagreed with. So, as we disagreed with it, we engaged and we started to work and campaign for amendments to the flawed bill and to seek support for those amendments, as we've heard from Joanna and others, really just trying to move this away from a flawed bill from the administration to something that drives police accountability in the county. So just a couple of things here on our own particular roadmap. As I think others have said, Joanna has said it, building relationships, I think, is important, essential. We ultimately were chasing a majority of the votes of the county council for some of the amendments that we were looking for, and building the relationships with county council members was essential. We also waged a social media campaign. We organized an email blitz. We had significant press outreach, and we were able to receive invitations as a result of our relationships to participate not only in the public hearing but also in the county council full work session on the bill and the amendments. So we were able to raise our voice, I think, on behalf of our task force and our coalition partners. So what were some of the flaws? And there were many flaws in the original bill, but we focused and prioritized these ones. First of all, the bill provided that law enforcement, the chief of police and the sheriff had the right to appoint two of the board members. As we said, no, the police should not be policing themselves. So we pushed back very hard upon law enforcement having the right to appoint members that were going to then be responsible for reviewing the conduct of those law enforcement agencies. Those are two ex officio appointments. Similar to the bill in Montgomery County, there was a heavy slant in terms of the qualifications of board members towards ex-law enforcement and ex-county government. Again, a significant flaw in our mind. We confronted a provision from the county executive that would have imposed confidentiality obligations on the board members. Undefined confidentiality obligations. In fact, the amendment introduced by the county executive indicated that they would have to sign the quotes necessary confidentiality agreements. We felt that there was a real risk that the PAB would be gagged from having any forward-facing role with the community, a denial, in fact, of what we believe to be one of the important roles of the PAB going forward in addressing accountability. And third, the county legislation, just as the state legislation, really doesn't have anything in there enabling the board to access law enforcement agency records and recordings. So hard to see how the PAB can do a good job on accountability if they can't get access to the information. So we prioritized our own objectives and then pushed for amendments to address those objectives. So the first objective, having a board that is a capable, independent body of Howard County residents reflective of the community it serves. So we were successful in having amendments introduced, and we were successful in having those amendments adopted at the last legislative hearing of the County Council on February 7th. So we have the law in effect in Howard County now. Indeed, we were able to increase the civilian membership of the board to 7 members by deleting the 2 law enforcement appointed board members. So that was withdrawn. That's I think the only place where the administration listened to us. Very strong pushback. You should not have law enforcement appointees on the board. So that was effectively removed. We also were able to delete from the background requirements for board members the slanting towards law enforcement. So a deletion of a requirement that there be experience or familiarity with a criminal justice agency or other government agency. So that's been deleted. And instead, we have successfully inserted, or an amendment passed, that provides that the qualification should be a committed interest and demonstrated active involvement in Howard County community service. So moving it well away from ex-law enforcement to community activism and involvement. We also had an amendment that requires training for board members. I think the original the original county bill said they could take a training, but we insisted on that. We believe that's important to expand the base of potential candidates for the board, that they have the ability and indeed the requirement to undertake training. Our second priority was indeed to have the board be able to play a forward-facing role with the community, to be able to communicate with the community. And we were able to beat back the administration's requirement that they be undefined confidentiality agreements entered into by board members by necking down, really limiting what such a confidentiality agreement would cover. So now the confidentiality agreements will only cover certain narrowly defined information that's consistent with state law, e.g. personal privacy, e.g. protection of child witnesses, medical records, and protecting investigatory techniques and procedures. So basically tracking with the MPIA and indeed the obligations of the charging committee as well. So a very narrow set of requirements now subject to confidentiality. Last set of obligations we were less successful on. This is the ability of the board to have full access to relevant and timely information with respect to law enforcement agency records and body-worn camera recordings. We were able to have inserted a limited, delayed right to such access. So the law as passed in the county does indeed allow access, board members to have access to records and recordings, but only after a civilian complaint of police misconduct, only after the law enforcement agency investigation and disciplinary proceeding, and only after the charging committee has completed its review. So many, many months after the incident that results in a civilian complaint will the board be able to get access to information and recordings. We pushed for greater and more timely access in the aftermath of so-called critical incidents. So officer-involved shootings or other substantial use of force, we pushed for, and indeed had an amendment introduced by one of the county council members that would have allowed the board immediate access in the aftermath of a critical incident to law enforcement agency records and recordings. Our view is that the board should be playing a role in the aftermath of a critical incident in ensuring accountability. Police accountability is being appropriately considered, that there are no misrepresentations of the content of body-worn camera recordings that have not been released to the public, that there are no conflicts of interest among prosecutors or other law enforcement agencies investigating the complaint, and essentially being the public's eye for accountability as the investigation proceeded. We got two out of 5 votes for that. It was close, and we're not giving up on that at this point. And just to finish up, we're not finished. We're going to continue to be actively engaged. We're going to be involved in the process to insert ourselves in the process for selection of the board chair and board members. We're going to continue to campaign for that timely access to records and recordings, and we're going to work on other improvements to the bill and indeed the budget and resources that are going to be assigned to the board going forward. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jim. So next we are going to hear from Baltimore County. So I'm going to turn over to Erica McDonald from the League of Women Voters.
Thank you. And Lorena is going to pull up some slides. Thank you. Hi, I'm Erica McDonald. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from Baltimore County. I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Baltimore County, and I'm the League's point person for police reform advocacy. And you can do the next slide, Lorena. So what I'm going to talk about is a little different because Baltimore County has not released a proposal or timeline for implementing the Police Accountability Board. So I'm going to start with a discussion of why community oversight would benefit Baltimore County for many reasons. This is with the intent of trying to raise the visibility of this issue as being important in Baltimore County to both those of you who might be interested, who are on this webinar and would like to join our work, but also to other people in the county who maybe don't understand the importance of the Police Accountability Board. Police have killed multiple Baltimore County residents, including 2 Black residents in 2016 and 2019 that have resulted in multi-million-dollar settlements, but no prosecution of police officers responsible in Baltimore County. There have been 1,085 reported use of force incidences between 2017 and September 2021, and approximately 45% of these were first or second degree assaults. And there were 201 reported case uses of force incidences in 2020. We don't have numbers for 2021, which is another problem. Police misconduct disproportionately impacts people of color in Baltimore County. The county reports use of force data. In 2020, 69% of use of force complaints were by Black or Hispanic people, who make up only 36.1% of the population in Baltimore County. And 77% of the complaints were against officers who are white. In 2020, if you look at all of the complaints of police misconduct, not just use of force, 71% were by Black or Hispanic residents. Also, if you look at traffic stop data from 2018, it indicates that 62% of stops in Baltimore County were Black or Hispanic residents. Again, disproportionately large compared to the population. Currently, police misconduct investigations are conducted by internal affairs with no civilian participation. The hearing board is a 3-member panel appointed by the chief of police, consisting of a captain or major who serves as the chairperson, a lieutenant, and a member of the department holding the same rank as the accused member. The Equitable Policing Work Group, which we have in Baltimore County, was established in November of 2019 and released an initial report in December of 2020, but only met once in 2021, in which they discussed the overview of police reform legislation in Maryland, but those minutes and the recording of that meeting have not been made available despite multiple requests. So there's also no transparency into current police misconduct investigations. Complainants are currently forbidden from disclosing information about cases until investigations are completed. Complainants are notified by mail of the outcome of the case and are not notified how a police officer is disciplined. So additionally, we don't have current data on misconduct or use of force complaints. The data dashboard that the county provides is not up to date. So we don't have data for all of 2021 or what's happening in 2022. So there's no transparency. Next slide, Lorena. So this is a sense of the timeline of events after the Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021 was passed in Baltimore County. Immediately following the passage of the bill, the Baltimore County Executive's Office or Administration and the Fraternal Order of Police approved a memorandum of understanding that extends LEOBR protections through July 2023. So it's a full year beyond what was laid out in the Maryland Police Accountability Act of 2021. But it doesn't preclude them from the responsibility of having to implement the Police Accountability Board by July 2022. So that still has to happen, despite that attempt to limit the Police Accountability Board's ability to do their work. Beginning last summer and continuing through this winter, advocates in Baltimore County have requested information from the county executive, the chair of the Equitable Policing Work Group, individual council representatives, the county office by phone, and we've written a letter to the editor that was published in the Baltimore Sun, and there have been no responses at all. Minutes from the Equitable Policing Work Group have not been provided, as I mentioned before. So after 7 months of no response from the county administration, a group of Baltimore County advocacy organizations started to work together to send an open letter to the county executive. Lorena, next slide. And these organizations include those listed above, as well as a variety of individuals who are involved with MCJPA. And we've kind of gotten together to work on this issue in Baltimore County. We've been working together over the last year on police accountability reform advocacy also. So what we're hoping for now is just transparency and community involvement in establishing the Police Accountability Board. Challenges for us include a very short time frame, 5 months, for engaging the county executive and the council, and for allowing community input on the proposal. Our great concern is that a proposal not be rammed down the county residents' throats because there's not time to include people who are impacted by police misconduct in the process. And obviously, we're very concerned about the same limitations to meaningful police accountability boards that have been encountered by other counties. We want a strong police accountability board that has independent power to investigate misconduct, adequate funding, no barriers to participation by impacted people, et cetera. So, but we're a ways from being able to have that discussion, and we're hoping we'll get there. So last slide, please reach out to Lorena or I, and our emails are on the slide here, if you would like to get involved. We will be meeting in the next couple of months weeks, to discuss our follow-up with the county executive from our open letter. And we would welcome any and all of your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. And then now we're going to move on to Arundel County. And so we're going to hear from Reverend Marguerite Morris and Stephen Wadden.
Good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I can see that our colleagues have been extremely busy. And so I think we're all facing this across the state of Maryland. And then I asked the question, did we think this was going to be easy? Because obviously it's not, and we're in it together. Absolutely in it together. So I'm Reverend Marguerite Morris, and I am speaking on behalf of Anne Arundel County, which also includes Annapolis, our state capital. And it's important to say that because that's a little bit of expanding from what we were doing before and with the CRB. So what we've done to date is that we've had multiple meetings with council persons, as well as with our county executive. But I also want to say that prior to this, we also requested, and as time went on in this process, we sent multiple communications as to why weren't we hearing anything about this. And we were just told there's something going on. So we were not really involved in the process. By the time the process came about, it was with the meeting, with us being pretty much informed of what they wanted to do. That process included the police employees, but it did not include very much input at all, to my knowledge, of community organizations. So that was problematic. We also see that, and I want to say this as well, even Anne Arundel County, police department's been around for 85 years. Annapolis has been around since 1867. And, this is where we're at today. So what we did in Anne Arundel County, we formed the Anne Arundel County Police Accountability Coalition. That's about 26 organizations strong. And we've been, again, meeting. We're now strategizing. We do feel that there's going to have to be a tremendous show of public interest, of public comment, because that's the only thing, in our opinion, or at least my opinion, that's going to move the needle. What we did was we put, when this happened with the bill coming in, they already had in their possession what we thought of was a healthy civilian review board submission, and everything was put on hold, obviously, because of all the changes. So therefore, the county knew what we thought was healthy, and we pretty much got none of that in what they're doing. So currently, the ACC, the charging board, would have subpoena power, but we have no investigative powers. So I laugh at that, because what are they going to subpoena? Well, we have in Anne Arundel County still, even though they've given us a little bit of this and a little bit of that, is still the police planning to investigate themselves. And the PAB and the ACC only having the oversight, well, only having the power to look at what the police have already decided, already investigated. And we know that that is problematic, because police, reports, they pretty much say what people want them to say. So again, we have the ability to just review. That's all we have. So what we've also asked them for is we have the PAB, which has pretty much been explained and is pretty much consistent across the state. We have the ACC, and then we even put in something on the trial board that we would like to have. In Anne Arundel County, what they're proposing is that the members, which would be, I believe, not 9, and I'll talk about the membership, don't quote me on that, but that what they're proposing is that the membership be vetted publicly. So we're proposing that the judge that will be appointed to that trial board come from a pool of publicly vetted judges. And then that would may help in the end when transitions change as well. They also decided that the board would be compensated, the voting members of the board would be compensated, non-voting members and compensated for expenses. The thing that we found most problematic was that the non-voting members, we have 7 districts and we have Annapolis, so that's 8. But they also didn't name any of the organizations that we wanted to that board. In other words, it consists of Anne Arundel County employees, including all 3, the police departments, the chiefs of the police departments or their representatives. We found that to be problematic, as well as being intimidating if you were going to look into the police department. But we also agree with, I think, Montgomery County and others, that on that voting, and let me say this for the public that's looking in, there are 2 different types of memberships, obviously, voting and non-voting. On the voting side, no police, whether retired or active duty at all. And on the non-voting side, we wanted named organizations for consultation purposes. And on that side is where they have the police chiefs and 2 of their employees. So there was no named organization like the NAACP, the ACLU, the Black Policemen's Organizations. None of those are currently in that. But we are continuing to work with our county council persons on amendments to this bill. I'm just looking down here real quick.
Reverend Marguerite, I just want to say, in regards to the county council members, we did also meet with all of our county council members once we received that draft presentation, the presentation of the draft bill from the county executive. Right. Also, I want to really go back and talk about some of the reasons why Anne Arundel County is important, because one, the Anne Arundel County Police Department has the jurisdiction over school resource officers. And according to the last full school year in person before COVID, Anne Arundel County had the largest number of in-school arrests in the state. And they were predominantly Black and brown students and it's generally focused on young Black boys who have learning disabilities. And so that's kind of how we would also envision one of the issues that has gone on. We recently had a young man named Deontay Quarles, who was killed by the Anne Arundel County Police Department. I think it was January 30th. And he was unarmed. It was a wellness check that his mother had called the police to come to their house in Crofton, and ended up where Mr. Quarles fighting with the police officers. One of the officers tased him, and then after the taser did not subdue Mr. Quarles, then the police shot him and killed him. And this was, in the midst of us having these discussions with the county executive and the county council regarding the Police Accountability Board. We just had a work session this past week with the county, well, it was Tuesday, with the county council members. County council members had a lot of questions regarding the Police Accountability Board. One of the questions that came from a county council member was, how many police trial boards did we have last year? And the police chief basically said, we haven't had any this year. We only had one last year. And the one last year that we had a police trial board for was a man named Daniel Reynolds. He was a police officer who put his knee on the neck in 2019 of a Anne Arundel County resident. And in the similar style as George Floyd, it gained a nationwide attention because it was recorded. And then it also led to the police chief at the time retiring. And so we have a new police chief who has replaced him. That police trial board reduced the penalty that was recommended by the police chief. The police chief recommended for Mr. Officer Reynolds to be fired, but this police trial board reduced the penalty to 6 days of suspension and some anger management courses. And then once that was accepted by the police chief, had the opportunity to increase that penalty, but she accepted the reduced penalty. So the question of whether or not there's police trial boards are effective, how many police trial boards we'll be having over the next year, or under this current structure, is going to be based off of the disciplinary matrix that we receive. And that's one of the important questions of whether or not how police chiefs and the Police Accountability Board will be able to put these various complaints within the disciplinary matrix. And if officers disagree, then they'll be able to appeal. But that's really one of the issues that we're going to have to deal with. And April is when the apparently learned through this coalition that we'll be learning more about the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission's decision on the disciplinary matrix. Go ahead, Reverend Marguerite.
Thank you, Steve. Steve and I tag team. Thank you so much for that. So currently, what they're trying to do and what they've submitted to us, if I just add a few more notes as we get prepared to move on, is that they're trying to exclude anyone that has been convicted of theft. I want everyone to hear this. Convicted of theft, dishonesty, fraud. And we thought that was problematic. And we won't say why when we're dealing with police accountability issues, but that was one of the things. And also in the, as far as diversity of community, they put in there that we would have diversity of community, but then they start each line out with that to the extent practical. So we're working with council people that we believe are going to submit amendments to have that cleared up. And I think that we're just about done. We have formed committees. We're continuing to meet. We formed action committees, committees, and we need to, again, have a strong showing of community interest. We've created a one-stop. There's communication going around where they can hit a button and they'll have all the tools that can come up to engage the community and being able to reach out to our county leaders, as well as to sign those petitions. We do know that, again, it's going to take a major public engagement. And I just want to say, as we see if Steve has anything else to add to this, but I want to say to Prince George County, if I didn't already say, my church is in Prince George County. And in our church bulletin was a advertisement to apply to be on your board. I should have took them up on it. So, and again, the temperature in our county is this, that it is problematic. Right now, we're in a holding place, even having civil meetings, or our police chief meeting with organizations that are bringing impacted persons. And we need this board to be reflective of our community. We're hopeful. We're going to do our best to work with you all across the state of Maryland to continue communicating that message. And Steve, did you have anything you want to add, sir? And thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Morris and Stephen. So I think what you've heard tonight is the community groups being consistent and persistent about establishing real effective civilian oversight in their county, and the resistance that each of them and the challenges each are facing, and they're the similar across the board. And it also heard at the top of the town hall with Davon going over just the history of the Baltimore civilian oversight and the struggle there to establish effective civilian oversight. There has to be a reason they're pushing back so hard on this, and it might be because it actually hold police accountable. So I think while frustrating and all the work that it takes into it, I think it is definitely necessary and critical work. And I'm very impressed and proud of this group and coalition for all of the coordinated efforts and just being a resource to each other, but also just being consistent every other, been meeting bi-weekly, if not weekly, for almost 2 years now at this point on this issue. And folks have been consistent, and this coalition has continued to grow. So I'm really thankful for all of you all. And at this time, want to open it up for any questions folks have that are tuning in that have for the panel. And then we'll close it out with just some closing remarks. And you all already have access to the next steps and action alerts that were mentioned and the links that have been dropped. So I will open it up to questions. Reverend Morris, did you have a question or did you have a comment?
I had a comment, but I could save it for if we'll have an opportunity for closing remarks.
Oh. I think there was one question we have here from Paul, who said, has there been any suggestion of collaboration or collusion among the police unions in our counties? That's a great question. I have not heard of a direct, and I'll let the other panels answer as well. I have not heard of a coordinated plan per se, but it's obvious that the resistance and pushback on the different provisions are consistent across the state, and the efforts to include police on a police accountability board has been consistent across the board as well. And I will just add that it has always been the police unions and those alike who have been resistant to community oversight for decades. So when we look at history and see why did the Baltimore Civilian Board bill get watered down and discipline stripped, it was because the FOP got involved. There's always historically and consistently been the mid part of it. So even if they're not on the front right now, releasing op-eds and opposition, we would be silly to think that they are not being just as coordinated as we all are trying to be to establish real civilian oversight. I'll go to Reverend Morris, then Joanna, then Stephen.
Yes, thank you. I want to say this. Leobor was one of the strongest in the country. So that was what we were kind of being under the suppression of. So what more can we anticipate that's been repealed and now we're trying to go forward? So the police, the FOP, all of them, they're serious about this. They're absolutely serious about it. And that's why we really have to be on our toes, because they are fighting us. And I want to say that I thank this organization that's hosting this tonight, because as I look back, we were up individuals across the state of Maryland to sometimes midnight and longer, waiting to testify, waiting to be heard. And the police wouldn't, sometimes they wouldn't even be there to even push back or say anything. And that is why we saw the Maryland General Assembly attempt to put this forward. This is what moved the needle. And I believe that at some point that they're going to come back, they're going to see that this has turned into sort of like almost a statewide, we didn't plan this and this is not helping. We got to fix this. And that's what we got to hold on for. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Stephen?
I just want to say that even outside of the law enforcement officers, I mean, you know, there's the FOP. There's several other unions that represent the chiefs, that represent the sheriffs, because the sheriffs are also underneath our Police Accountability Board. There's other police unions that are attempting to retain the power that they have. And not only that, but underneath our charter, the county executive is the civilian. You know, the county executive is the one who is not only in control and determining the actions of the police department, but also determining the discipline of the police department from the civilian review side. And our county executive even acknowledges that. So they have the responsibility of bringing forth this bill that is going to give away their power. You know, they're going to do the least that they can. The county executives, the people who are responsible for the police are the ones that are giving us the bills, and so they're going to do their best to maintain the power, even outside of the Fraternal Order of Police or any other police union. You know, there's the question of whether or not, like, to put it another way, our charter took away the power of policing from county commissioners back in the 60s and gave it to the county executive. And so now the county executive has to give that back to people and that are going to be, appointed by the county commissioners. That's going to be a difficult, move regardless. It's a power struggle that we're going to have to, that we're also trying to negotiate and navigate. And it's not just within this Police Accountability Board discussion that we're going to be advocating. We have to advocate on multiple levels of structural change that will allow civilians to be even more engaged in police accountability.
That is absolutely right. Thank you for that. And then Nikki?
Excuse me. I'd just like to say that right now, it's very unfortunate that right now we're sitting here talking about Maryland, and because the same issues that everyone's talking about on this call is happening across the United States. So police accountability boards are failing across the state for this exact same reason. Political interference, police FOP interference, lack of public knowledge, lack of public involvement. So police accountability boards across this country are failing simply because of what a lot of people fail to mention is financial benefit. So the thing is we got everybody that is trying to stop this, they're feeding each other. So we have everyone's hand in everyone's pocket, and the only people who are suffering are the citizens. And they don't even realize it, because guess what? They're who I was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, who I felt like I'm a good citizen and that couldn't happen to me. And my family is a good citizen, so this wouldn't happen to me, but it did happen to me. So now here I am sitting on a panel trying to understand how it happened to my family and why it happened to my family, and seeing how we're fighting the same fight as my grandparents were fighting, as my parents were fighting. And all we get is a lot of, it takes time. Well, how much time does it take? The problem is that we're fighting a machine. We're fighting a machine that feeds each other. We're fighting the police, who feeds the courts, who feeds the county execs, who feeds the DA, who feeds everyone. So everyone is eating off of our pain and our misery. And so no one's willing to make a change to that. So unfortunately, Maryland did pass a bill, but it was a very weak bill. And now we're trying to go back and fix a bill that they passed and strengthen a bill that they passed. And since they passed that bill, more people has died. More people have died at the hands of police. So that's proof that this bill was useless and it's not working, because citizens have died afterwards, citizens have been brutalized, and reports are still coming in, and they haven't done anything to stop that. And in fact, they've made some of the processes that they put in that bill, they've had loopholes to avoid having to actually follow the process and provide the public information. And I guess for me, I just feel like, I hope that there's a lot of public people who are on here now, who were me 2 years ago, who's listening, who actually passes this information along to other people, so that they can kind of wake up and understand that this is not something that could not happen to you. This can happen to you. And then you're going to be sitting there wondering how this happened. Well, it happened because we need everybody to fight for this change. We need everybody to speak up. We need all the voices. We need people to understand that your tax dollars is paying for this. And not all policemen are heroes. And that's the one thing that I would like people to understand is, if all police officers were heroes, we wouldn't need a police accountability board. We wouldn't need police oversight. We wouldn't need any of this if all police officers were heroes. There is a job that they chose to do. The job has policies, it has procedures, and they were supposed to follow it. So for us to sit here and have to now go back because they refuse to follow their own processes and procedures, like, this is a problem across America. So I just hope people wake up. I hope people join these organizations. I hope people get educated and just help make improvements, because you're not above this. This is not something that will happen to you. There's a lot of good citizens getting killed.
Thank you for that, Nikki. I'll go to Reverend Morris and then Jim, and then we have one question, then we're going to close out.
Yes, thank you again. You know, it almost seems like if I were, say, the FOP, and I knew that some change had to happen because of all that crisis that was going on in 2020, it seems like I would strategically have come out with this bill. And I know that seems kind of harsh, but somebody kind of thought, let's do it this way, because what is happening is that it threatens the very stability of the only two existing CRBs we had. It threatened, and here we're almost like at ground zero, just trying to get them to give us police accountability. And across the state of Maryland, the intent is to leave the police investigating themselves. So I asked the question, I said, maybe we just need to keep asking, why not? Because this does impact us. And I mean, if anybody had a reason, and I know many of the people in these coalitions are impacted persons that have been through a lot, and I'm one of those people. And some of us, if anybody had a reason to say we hate, we're not saying we hate. We know that there are many good police officers. That's the fact. But those few bad ones have wreaked hell in somebody's life, and it's like they don't want to listen. So we know they're going to come back to this, and prayerfully they'll listen to the people that are voting when we get back to this point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Morris. Jim? There you go.
Mute myself. Yes, sorry, 2 unmute buttons, my apologies. You mentioned there was a question in the chat, and it's possible that I'm going to cover that, I don't know, but I did notice from one of the attendees, there was a question which is there a way for the different coalitions to share templates, flyers, talking points, social media posts, etc.? And I just wanted to comment, this has been a tremendous, I think, aggregation of experience to date, and the challenges we've all faced, some of the ideas some of the areas that we prioritized to try and introduce amendments to the legislation. And I think that the idea or the question that has been asked in the chat is really a good one. And that is the amount of time, effort, thought, research, campaigning that has gone on at the county level. I think we could usefully spend a little bit of time aggregating or at least making available at least some of the work product that we've done. So great idea. I don't think there's a resource at the moment that is available across coalitions or across organizations other than ad hoc sharing. But I think it's a really good idea. And for the person who asked that question in the chat, perhaps we should all try and pull a little bit more the work that we've done. This has been a tremendous forum for that. And we're available to share any of our ideas, any of our work product, which is a lot, on the areas that we focused on at any time. So please feel free to contact us.
Thank you for that, Jim. And we have a police accountability board implementation guide. So I think that would be a good place to add some of these materials. So I think that's a great idea, and that's something that we can work on. Another chat and another question in the chat was, is there a coordinated effort for all the county leaders to implement the same standards for establishing a PAB? So as I mentioned, we have this guide that lays out all of the recommendations. Implementation looks different depending on the jurisdiction. Baltimore City and Prince George's County is a lot more similar, and some of these other jurisdictions are starting from scratch. So their implementation looks a lot more similar. So the guide is it tries to tailor to that. But I think overall, I think the asks have been the same, that communities reflected on the membership, and there's an open and transparent process, and explicitly asking for more powers beyond the scope of what HB 670 lays out, because if it's necessary, and all of the other things that were mentioned here tonight. So I think there is a coordinated effort. It just looks different in different jurisdictions, and all of that is laid out in this guide. And then for those who are just tuning in tonight and have not heard anything about police accountability boards in their jurisdiction, definitely encourage you to check out the guide and reach out to some of the folks on this call who can be a resource to you as well. And before we kind of close out, there's been a bunch of links left in the dropped in the chat, so that use that as a resource. And I will, if anyone has any closing words, we have about 3 minutes, so we have like 30 seconds each. I think we can get through it. And I will kick it over to start with Baltimore City. So I'll turn over to Baltimore City for any closing remarks or next steps they'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I would just say there's a Baltimore House delegation hearing that'll be next Friday. And so if you have friends or family, or if you live in Baltimore City, call your delegates and senator and tell them to urge them to support Senate Bill 441 and House Bill 991.
Prince George's County, any last words?
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you to all the other panelists, and to just express how really helpful hearing from each of you, and hearing again all the similarities that we're going through, but then also listening to some of you all's strategies, which we're behind the 8 ball on some of this stuff, but we're going to be able to utilize some of this good information that you all have shared. And also just remind anybody from Prince George's County, be looking for an email from me tonight, because we got to get on the move. So appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. Stephen?
I just wanted to say that the coalition created an action team as well, so that we can support local organizing with police accountability boards, and lift up through social media or any other methods what's happening in your county. So if you have something that's going on, I know Harford County has had a lot of issues with profiling of immigrants. Also in Frederick, there's also a great deal of profiling of immigrants. So if you have those police accountability boards are coming down the pike, so join the coalition, and we can also lift up your organizing and provide you with more information.
Absolutely, thank you. Joanna?
I just wanted to thank the MCJPA and the ACLU for all of the leadership and education and support that we've received, because we would not have been able to do any of that without this. And it's really just been such an honor to be able to be part of this collaborative statewide effort and to get to know everybody else and really just like share in the work that you're all doing and to learn from all of you. So thank you.
Thank you. Erica?
I'm going to say exactly what Joanna just said. The amount that I have learned from this group about advocacy and about police reform, and then also just about how to keep coming back when you're frustrated and showing up, has just been invaluable. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be involved with the group.
Definitely thankful for you as well. And then I think I'm missing a jurisdiction. Am I? Or do we cover everybody? I think. No, we covered everybody. So thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. If you've heard a lot of information tonight, the folks on this call need your support. And it's going to take all of us to make sure that we establish effective and real civilian oversight. So hope you'll be able to join these efforts, whether it's just sending an email, showing up to a hearing, writing testimony. Those are all things that might seem small, but are huge help. So please consider supporting these organizations. And if you had a question and didn't get covered tonight, please do reach out to us either by comment or through our prospective organizations. And thank you all for tuning in. Good night.